The moment you stop reacting is the moment she realizes she's losing control over you, and that's when everything starts to change. Most men don't even see this happening. They think they're just communicating, fixing things, or showing they care. But what they're actually doing is feeding the very behavior that's frustrating them. Every time you react emotionally, whether it's getting upset, sending long messages, asking for explanations, or trying to prove your worth, you're giving her exactly what she needs to stay in control of the situation, because your reaction is validation. It tells her that what she's doing is working. It tells her that she can influence your emotions, your mood, your attention. And once she knows that, consciously or unconsciously, she keeps repeating the same patterns, not because she's trying to hurt you, but because there's no consequence for her behavior. You're rewarding it with your attention. Think about it. If she pulls away and you chase harder, what does that teach her? That she doesn't need to put an effort, that you'll always come closer no matter how distant she becomes. If she acts cold and you try to warm things up, you're the one adjusting, not her. And slowly, without realizing it, you lose your position. But everything shifts the moment you stop reacting. When you don't respond emotionally, when you don't try to fix, explain, or chase, you remove the reward. You remove the validation she was getting from your reactions. And now, for the first time, her behavior meets silence instead of attention. That silence is powerful because now she has to sit with her own actions. There's no immediate response to reassure her, no emotional reaction to confirm she still has influence over you, and that creates a gap, a space where she starts to think, why didn't he react? Is he pulling away? Did I push him too far? And those questions begin to shift the dynamic. Now, instead of you analyzing her behavior, she starts analyzing yours. But here's where most men fail. They stop reacting for a short time, but internally they're still waiting, still anxious, still checking their phone. And eventually they break, they go back to reacting because they can't handle the silence. That's not real control. Real control is when your lack of reaction comes from a place of strength, not strategy. You're not trying to manipulate the situation. You're simply choosing not to engage in behavior that lowers your value. You're choosing peace over chaos. And when that shift is genuine, she feels it. She senses that something is different, that you're not as easy to influence as before, that her usual patterns aren't getting the same response. And that's when she starts to become more aware of you, more curious, and sometimes even more invested. Because now your attention is no longer guaranteed, and people always value what they can't easily control. So the next time she tests you, pulls away, or tries to trigger a reaction, don't give her what she expects, because the less you react, the more she starts to feel. The moment you go quiet, something shifts inside her mind that most men completely underestimate. Because when you stop explaining yourself, stop chasing, and stop filling every silence with words, you create something rare, space. And in that space, her thoughts louder. See, when you're constantly reacting, constantly messaging, constantly trying to keep things alive, she doesn't have to think about you. You're already there, predictable, available, and easy to understand. There's no mystery, no curiosity, no reason for her to question anything. But when you pull that energy back, when your presence is no longer constant, she starts to notice. At first, it might feel small. She might just think, hey, he's busy, or he'll text later. But as the silence continues, her mind begins to fill in the gaps, and that's where everything starts to change, because now she has time to reflect. She starts replaying your last conversation. She starts thinking about how you used to respond, how you used to show up, and how that's different now. She begins to compare your past behavior with your current silence, and that contrast creates emotional tension. Why is he different? Did I do something wrong? Is he losing interest? These questions don't come up when you're always reacting. They only come up when there's space for them to exist. And here's the key: your silence isn't about ignoring her, it's about not over explaining yourself, not over investing, and not trying to control her perception of you. You're allowing her to come to her own conclusions, and that's powerful because people believe what they conclude on their own far more than what you try to convince them of. When you explain too much, you remove the mystery. When you chase clarity, you lower your value. But when you stay calm, centered, and silent when needed, you allow her emotions to grow naturally. Now she starts to feel your absence instead of just noticing your presence. And there's a big difference between the two. Anyone can notice when you're around, but when someone starts to feel your absence, That's when emotional impact begins. That's when they start to miss you, think about you, and question their own behavior. But again, this only works if your silence comes from strength. If you're silent but internally desperate, checking your phone every minute, hoping for a message, that energy eventually leaks out. You break your own frame, you go back to reacting, and the cycle repeats. True silence is calm, it's grounded, it's not rushed or forced. You're genuinely okay whether she reaches out or not. You're focused on your life, your priorities, your growth. And that's what makes her feel it, because now instead of you trying to get her attention, she's starting to feel the shift in yours. And that's when awareness begins to grow inside her, because silence doesn't push her away, it makes her think. When you detach emotionally, you step out of the pattern she's been used to, and that's where the real shift begins. Because up until that point, everything between you has likely been predictable. She acts a certain way, you respond a certain way, and the cycle keeps repeating. That cycle is what keeps her comfortable, even if her behavior is inconsistent or confusing. But the moment you detach, that pattern breaks. Now, understand this clearly: emotional detachment is not about pretending you don't care. It's about not letting her behavior control your internal state. You're still present, still grounded, but you're no longer reacting based on fear, insecurity, or the need for validation. And that's what makes it powerful. Because when you're emotionally attached, every little thing affects you. A delayed reply makes you overthink. A cold response makes you question yourself. A change in her tone makes you feel like something is wrong. And all of that leads to reactions that pull you deeper into her frame. But when you detach, your mindset changes completely. Now, instead of thinking, why is she acting like this? You start thinking, if she's acting like this, that's her choice. You're no longer trying to decode every signal or fix every problem. You're simply observing and responding with calm control. That alone makes you different from most men, because most men get emotionally pulled in. They get caught in the ups and downs trying to stabilize something that isn't consistent. But a man who is detached doesn't chase stability, he becomes it. And when you become that stable presence, her behavior starts to stand out more clearly. Now she notices that you're not reacting the same way, that you're not getting pulled into emotional highs and lows, that you're not seeking reassurance or trying to control the situation. And that lack of reaction creates uncertainty for her, because she can't read you anymore. Before, she knew exactly how you'd respond. Now she doesn't, and that unpredictability combined with your calm energy creates a different kind of tension. Not the chaotic tension of arguments or confusion, but the quiet tension of curiosity. She starts to wonder what changed. She starts to pay more attention. And here's the deeper shift: when you detach, you stop chasing outcomes. You're no longer focused on getting her back, making her act right, or winning her over. You're focused on maintaining your own standard, your own peace, your own direction. That independence is what makes you attractive, because now your happiness isn't tied to her actions, your confidence isn't shaken by her mood, and your behavior isn't influenced by her inconsistency. You're grounded. And when a man is grounded, he becomes hard to manipulate, hard to read, and hard to replace. Not because he's trying to be, but because he's no longer giving away his emotional control so easily. That's what breaks the pattern. Because now, instead of you adapting to her behavior, she starts adapting to yours. And that's when the dynamic truly begins to change. Because once you detach, the cycle loses its power. The moment she realizes she can't influence your emotions the way she used to is the moment she starts feeling something she's not used to: loss of control. And that feeling is what begins to shift her behavior. Up until now, she's been comfortable. Not necessarily because everything was perfect, but because she understood the dynamic. She knew that if she pulled back, you would come closer. If she became distant, you would try harder. If she created confusion, you would chase clarity. There was a pattern, and that pattern gave her a sense of control over how things played out. But when you stop reacting, that control starts slipping. Now, when she pulls back, you don't chase. When she acts cold, you don't try to warm things up. When she creates space, you don't rush in to fill it. Instead, you remain steady, calm, and unaffected. And that's where the shift begins, because now she's facing a version of you she can't predict, and unpredictability creates uncertainty. At first, she might test it. She might pull away a little more, act slightly different, or try to trigger the same reactions she used to get. Not consciously playing a game, but trying to understand if the dynamic is still the same. But when she sees that your response doesn't change, that's when it hits her. Something is different. And that realization creates tension inside her. Because now, instead of feeling secure in how you'll respond, she starts to question it. Why isn't he reacting? Why is he losing interest? Did something change? Why is he talking to someone else? These thoughts begin to replace the certainty she once had. And here's where it gets interesting. That uncertainty starts pulling her toward you, not because you're chasing her, but because she's trying to regain a sense of understanding and connection. She starts paying more attention to your actions, your responses, your energy. She becomes more aware of your presence precisely because it's no longer predictable. This is where attraction quietly builds, because attraction isn't just about looks or words, it's about emotional experience. And when she goes from feeling in control to feeling unsure, from knowing exactly where she stands to questioning everything, that emotional shift creates a deeper level of engagement. But only if you stay grounded. If you break and go back to reacting, the dynamic resets. She regains that sense of control and the pattern continues. That's why consistency in your behavior matters more than anything. You don't just stop reacting once, you maintain that standard. And as you do, she starts adjusting. She may reach out more. She may show more interest. She may become more consistent, not because you told her to, but because she feels the change in you. She senses that she can't rely on the old dynamic anymore. And people always adapt to new dynamics. But the real power here isn't in making her feel uncertain, it's in becoming a man who is no longer controlled by external behavior. A man who stays steady regardless of what someone else does. Because when you reach that level, you don't just shift her perception, you redefine the entire interaction. And that's when the balance of control finally evens out. When your attention is always available, it feels normal, it feels expected, and anything that feels expected eventually loses its value. That's why so many men unknowingly lower their own attraction. They give too much too consistently without requiring anything in return. But the moment you stop reacting, the moment you stop giving your time and energy so freely, something important happens. Your value begins to rise, not because you're pretending to be distant, but because your presence is no longer guaranteed. See, people don't fully appreciate something when it's always there, it becomes part of the background. But when that same thing becomes limited, when access to it is no longer certain, the perception changes, it starts to feel important. It starts to feel worth paying attention to. That's exactly what happens with your time, your energy, and your attention. When you were constantly reacting, always available, always responding quickly, always trying to keep things going. She didn't have to work for your attention. It was just there. And because of that, it didn't carry much weight. But now things are different. Now you're not reacting the same way. You're not jumping at every message. You're not trying to fix every situation. You're focused on your own life, your own priorities, your own direction. And because of that, your availability naturally decreases. And that's what creates scarcity. Scarcity isn't something you fake, it's something that happens when your life is full. When you have purpose, when you have standards, when your time actually matters, you can't just give it away to anyone who shows up halfway. And she feels that. She starts to notice that you're not as accessible, that you're not always there to respond, to engage, to give her that emotional feedback she used to get. And that absence creates a subtle tension because now, instead of you seeking her attention, she starts to feel the lack of yours. She starts wondering what you're doing, who you're with, why you're not as available. And those thoughts slowly shift her focus toward you, not because you told her to, but because your behavior created that shift naturally. And here's the key: when your value rises through scarcity, her effort often rises too. She may start reaching out more, showing more interest, being more consistent, not because you demanded it, but because she senses that if she doesn't, she might lose access to you completely. And people always put more effort into what they feel they can lose. But you have to stay grounded in this. You can't suddenly become available again the moment she shows a little interest. You can't go back to overgiving just because she gives a little more. That's how the cycle resets. You maintain your standard. You give your time and attention to those who meet you at your level, not those who give you the bare minimum. And when you operate from that place, your value doesn't just rise in her eyes, it becomes part of who you are. Because now your presence isn't something she can take for granted, it's something she has to earn. And that's what makes it truly valuable. And at a certain point, when you stop reacting, stay grounded, and hold your position without chasing or over explaining. Everything comes down to one final outcome. She either wakes up or she walks away. And this is where most men get uncomfortable because they're still attached to a specific result. They want her to wake up, they want her to realize your value, come back, and start treating you right. But that expectation is exactly what weakens your position because it ties your behavior to her response. Real power comes when you're okay with both outcomes. Because when you truly stop reacting, when you genuinely detach and focus on your own life, you're no longer trying to force anything. You're not trying to convince her, change her, or fix the situation. You're simply showing through your actions what you will and won't tolerate. And that clarity forces a decision. If she has genuine interest, if she still values you, she will feel the shift. She'll notice that you're no longer easy to influence, no longer chasing, no longer reacting the way you used to. And that creates a sense of urgency inside her. She starts to realize that if she doesn't step up, she could lose you. And that's when she begins to wake up. Her behavior changes. She becomes more consistent, more responsive, more engaged. She may reach out more often, show more effort, and try to reconnect in a way that aligns with your energy. Not because you demanded it, but because she feels the possibility of losing something valuable. But here's the part you have to understand: not everyone will choose to step up. Some people will choose to walk away instead, not because you did something wrong, but because they were never willing or able to meet you at the level you require. And when that happens, it can feel like a loss, especially if you were emotionally invested. But in reality, it's clarity because what you're left with is the truth, not potential, not mixed signals, not confusion, just a clear outcome. Either she values you enough to rise to your standard or she doesn't. And if she doesn't, then holding on would have only kept you stuck in the same cycle. That's why this stage is so important. It's not about getting her back, it's about getting yourself back, your standards, your self respect, your emotional control. You're no longer bending to keep someone in your life. You're standing firm and letting the right people align with you naturally. And when you operate from that place, you stop fearing loss because you understand that losing the wrong person is actually a gain. So whether she wakes up and comes back with genuine effort or she walks away and removes herself from your life, you come out stronger, more grounded, more aware of your value because you didn't react, you didn't chase, you didn't lose yourself trying to hold on to something uncertain. You stayed in control. And in the end, that's the only thing that truly matters.